Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hello and welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Starting a few minutes late today, but worth waiting for. If you are listening to this show but would rather be watching it, go to YouTube and enter KGRA, then Meanwhile Here on Earth. You can also access all of our previous broadcasts there, as well as becoming a KGRA subscriber so that you can listen to or watch any of the zillion plus shows they have in their huge archive. Why not get right to our guest today, rather than the monologue that I was going to say, but is not nearly as interesting as the person we're going to be spending the next 2 hours with. If the X-Files fictional character, Fox Mulder, were a real person, he'd undoubtedly be documentarian James Fox. For 27 years, Fox traveled across the world in pursuit of the truth regarding UFOs. He directed and produced 4 films on the subject, and in 2007 orchestrated an event with help from journalist Leslie Kean, co-founder of the Coalition for Freedom of Information, which continues to be hailed as one of the top 2 most credible civilian efforts of disclosure on UFOs in history. Fox assembled 14 speakers, including 2 retired generals and several other military officers, a former governor, civilian pilots, government scientists from 7 countries: Belgium, Chile, France, Iran, Peru, the United Kingdom, and the United States, at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., to give firsthand testimonials on their encounters, investigations with UFOs. James Fox is convinced not only that UFOs are real, but that the government has concealed information on the subject from the public for more than 65 years. In his study, Fox proudly displays a framed letter from Steven Spielberg, who called one of his earlier films compelling, and states, "I hope the government will someday reveal the truth and natural origin of UFOs." James Fox was born in England and raised in New York and California. He began his journalism career early in life as an assistant to his father, writer, photographer Charles Fox, a quadriplegic with multiple sclerosis. Together, they traveled on many magazine assignments, from Rolling Stone and Car and Driver to Sports Illustrated, conducting interviews with the likes of Stephen Hawking and race car legend Dan Gurney. James finished and sold his first UFO documentary to Discovery Communications by the time he was 28. He's since completed 7 films for the likes of Sci-Fi, the Learning Channel, and History Channels, has made frequent appearances on The Larry King Show, Nightline, Dateline, Anderson Cooper, Joe Rogan, Fox News, Logan Paul, and many others. His latest film, The Phenomenon, is being distributed by 1091 and has been in the top 10 documentary movie charts on iTunes for 6 straight months. James Fox, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Wow, that was one hell of an intro. I always feel like I gotta meet this guy.
Look in the mirror.
I can't believe what he did.
It's one thing to be a legend in your own mind. It's another thing to be a legend in other people's minds.
I'm just a curious Joe Public, really, at the end of the day.
after all of our chats and the time we've spent together over the years, it's really an honor and a pleasure to be asking you questions about your life that I'd like to think that our viewers and listeners would want to know. So many people that are listening know who you are, but of course they really don't. We have public figures that we grow so fond of or respectful of their work that we actually have the illusion that we know who they are, but we don't. And for me, you've done so many interviews, especially, my gosh, since the release of The Phenomenon, which I think was in December when it dropped and started to stream after its own legendary process of finally coming to the fore. And so for me, I'm excited to find out how you became the person you are. So let's go back to the beginning. You were born in England. You know that. Where in England were you born?
Exeter.
Oh, very good. Is that where your parents' families were from, or had they settled there? What was their background? I'm assuming they were both English.
Yeah, well, so my mother was Romanian. Her family came over around the turn of the last century and worked on the Ford building Model Ts. That was my great-grandfather, Toddy Gropsorian. And they landed in Sacramento, California. And funny enough, I just recently was driving with my aunt because my mother passed, unfortunately, several years ago. Yeah. And we were going to the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. And she said, you know, I don't think your mom has ever shown you the house we grew up in Sacramento. And I'm thinking to myself, well,
oh my gosh,
it's clearly not there anymore. And I turned to her and I said, well, no, she hasn't. In fact, my mother spoke very little of her parents to me. Yeah. And she said, yeah, it's because your mother had a falling out with her dad and your mother was very stubborn and she never looked back. And but if you want to, she said, we could get off this exit on the way to, where we're going and I can show you the house we grew up in. So
oh my gosh.
Of course I said yes. So we arrived at this house and she said, you see that brick driveway? Do you see that footpath? Do you see that little shed over there? I said, yeah. Said, your grandpa built most of that, and I helped lay those bricks back in 1947.
Oh
and I'm
my gosh!
You are kidding me? And it's all still there. She said, yeah, they haven't even changed the color of the paint of some of the shacks in the garden, and it was like a big orchard. They had like trees in the back, fruit trees, and huge lot. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so that was where my mother had grown up. She grew up speaking Romanian a little bit right. with her parents. And I guess it was like 1963, right around there. My mother was in a youth hostel in San Francisco and my dad was visiting and they met in an elevator in San Francisco in a youth hostel. And that was that.
What was your dad doing in San Francisco at that time, rather than Exeter?
My father was pursuing his career as a journalist. He had a fascination with race cars, but he was it's funny actually. He's sort of an intellectual on the one hand, but also loved motor racing and all the cool stuff that as a kid you're just fascinated by. But anyway, they met and. But my father has deep roots in England. He was born in England, and he was sort of back and forth. And and so I was born in the Southwest in Exeter. And my grandmother had a house at the time, I think, in Wellington, not too far from this place called Taunton. And yeah, and you had mentioned an intro. I got to show you something. Hold on a sec.
Yeah.
You talked about this letter from Steven Spielberg, and it literally is hanging right there.
Please.
Yeah. This is a pride possession here. I don't know how well you can see it.
Yes. We all have letters from Steven Spielberg on our wall. It's no big deal.
Well, no, I know. And I'm going to read it to you because it's really cool.
Please.
Yeah. It says, Okay. Steven Spielberg, July 6th, 2009. Dear Larry, and he was talking to Larry King because at the time, Larry reached out to Steven Spielberg because we had a screening at one of the executive producers' house of an early version of I Know What I Saw. It was pretty polished, but it wasn't totally done. So Larry King sent a copy of it. I think it was like a DVD at the time, to Steven Spielberg. And it was really funny because I got a phone call from a woman named something Cesario at CAA, Jacqueline, I think it was. And she said, James Fox, this is Jacqueline Cesario at CAA. I just want you to know that Steven Spielberg is about to watch your movie. I said, you're kidding me. She said, no. And it was like 10 o'clock in the morning or something. And I said, wow. Yeah, she said, yeah. And he's going to go to the studio and he's going to sit down. It's 10 in the morning. I'm thinking, my gosh. So I said, well, fantastic. Well, let me know how it goes. So I'm just thinking the whole time, I can't believe Steven Spielberg's looking at my UFO doc. I Know What I Saw. Yeah. So I went down and I had tea with my father at the time. And you know, we were just looking at each other going, I can't believe Steven Spielberg's looking at my movie. You know, I think maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours went by and we couldn't stop. We were so giddy about it, you know.
Of course.
and I get a phone call from Cesario again, Jacqueline Cesario, I think it was. And she said, well, he watched it. I said, well, oh, okay. Well, what happened? What did he say? He said, he didn't really say anything. He just walked out and he wrote a letter. I said, he wrote a letter? She said, yeah, he wrote a letter to Larry. I said, well, what did the letter say? She said, I don't know. He put it in Larry. So I'm just sitting there going, oh my God, can somebody please tell me? So anyway, so about 2 days later, maybe 3 days later, I get a call from Larry King's office. I think it was my dear friend Avriel Gallagher, one of the producers. And she says, hey, you're not going to believe this, but Larry got a letter from Steven Spielberg. And I said, wow.
I believe
it. I said, wow. I said, what does it say? She goes, you know what? I tell you what, I'm not going to read it to you. I'm just going to send it to you. So she sends the letter FedEx. I get it the next morning. FedEx driver. I live in a small town, so it's population like 2,500. And everybody kind of knows everybody. We know like the FedEx driver, and the FedEx driver shows up at my house, and he goes, James, you're not gonna believe it. You got a FedEx package from Larry King. And I said, yeah. He goes, do you mind if I do it? Tell me. I said, well, it gets better. He goes, what's that? I said, it's from Steven Spielberg. He goes, oh my God. So we sat there and the FedEx driver and myself opened it up and we read it. And I'll read it to you. I'll read it to you guys right now.
Please.
All right, here we go. At the time when I got this letter, I didn't need glasses, but now I do. Okay, here we go. Dear Larry, with great curiosity, I watched the documentary you sent over and found it compelling. Personally, I would like to think that we are not alone, and even though I have devoted a generous percentage of my movies to extraterrestrial-related themes, I, for one, have never seen a UFO that's so unfair. I hope you will continue to pursue this topic on your program and that someday our government will offer a total disclosure about what they know about unidentified flying objects and their true and natural origins. I continue to enjoy, watching you and all your guests. All my best, Steven Spielberg. Isn't that cool?
That's beyond cool. There's another word to describe it. I'll get back to you when I figure out what that word is. That's very cool. Let's start here.
Yeah.
We got somebody on a motorcycle in this picture. Come on back.
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Who's this guy?
That was a symbol of freedom in my youth. I absolutely just couldn't ride enough motorcycles. I look at that photograph and it just brings back memories of just being free and being away from all my troubles. And, the wind blowing through my hair. And my association with motorcycles is freedom.
Let's go back even before this. Were you actually born in Bolinas?
No, I was born in England, Exeter, England.
Oh, right, of course. How old were you when you moved to Bolinas, California?
I was about probably 3.5, maybe coming up on 4.
Oh my gosh. Okay. A lot of our viewer listeners don't know from Bolinas, California. I know because when you were a boy and I was a bigger boy, on my very first trip to California, I ended up in Bolinas, California, and this is the early 70s. Stayed with a good friend there, and I thought I was like in a John Steinbeck novel. It was beautiful. It was rustic. It was quiet. It was what it remains, a small town, basically just over the Golden Gate from San Francisco. And I remember I took a lot of pictures on the beach, especially of my friend, etc. And it's always stuck in my mind. And thinking of you getting to grow up there and having early memories there and being a kid in contact with nature, which now you are basically replicating with your son, Ollie. Let's take a look at this.
Yeah, that's taken up on the Mount Tamalpais, which is basically the same mountain. Well, not basically, it is fully the same mountain I take my son up since he was a week old. And I had just taken a fall, and my father was comforting me. This is one of the last times I remember him walking. He had a cane. Yeah. And that ring he has on his finger, I still have that ring to this day.
Is this from the same series here?
This one is, gosh, we had just moved to Bolinas, so you can see I was probably coming up on 4 years old, because I remember being in Bolinas in late 1971, 72, and I was born in 68. So that would have put me at 3 or 4 years old.
Okay, I told you after you emailed me this photo, and I opened it up and I look at it, my jaw dropped. Except for the shape of the nose, I thought I was looking at a picture of you. DNA does that thing. We tend to look like people we're related to sometimes more than other times, but often I think we don't see it as clearly as other people. But wow, was all I could say, and just very moved by the reality. By the time you were, well, here's another sweet one.
Oh yeah, that's Mount Tamalpais. That's where I'm on that mountain every day. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah.
By the time you were like 5 or 6 years old and, finding yourself living your life in this beautiful community, what was the first thing as a boy that you thought, when I grow up, I want to be? Well,
it's really funny because I was fascinated by race cars because I kind of grew up around them. Kids love, especially little boys, they love like cars and motorcycles and things that go fast. And I just, I was around it as a kid because my dad would take me to, either a race he was doing, a story for Car and Driver, or it would have been, I'm trying to think, it would have been Car and Driver. Automobile, I think, was a little later, probably in the late 70s, early 80s. But for Car and Driver magazine, he was writing for when he was living in Brooklyn, New York. But he would go to a race and he would write about the race. But he had a fascination with the overall topic. But he would pick really interesting stories, and we'd get to travel on expense. And I was an extension of his legs, and I was his, when as I got older, I was the chauffeur and the nurse, and I was his legs. I was how he got around. I have a bad back to this day because I was carrying my dad when I was 15, 16, 17, 18. I could literally pick my dad up, and he was a big guy. He's 6'4", and I could take him out of his wheelchair and put him straight into a car, no problem. Which I was strong enough to do that even today, but I didn't have the back for it because you're doing like these really awkward turns. And I was looking for another photograph that I used to have in here. Oh, I think I have it right here. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Right here. Yeah, I don't know why this one wasn't. Tell me if there's too much reflection.
Wow.
There you see me kneeling in the corner. That's Stephen Hawking.
Huh.
Stephen Hawking loved Marilyn Monroe. And he had all these equations on the chalkboard behind us.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that cool?
That's breathtaking when you think of the implications and that you are a witness to this moment in history.
Yeah.
And, your dad and Stephen Hawking shared something profound in terms of the fragility of life and, the shell that you live in. Here's a photo that I love. It's your mother. And there is something about her smile, her body language. The house is filled with stuff. Basically, you didn't grow up in a traditional way. It ended up that although you had two wonderful parents, your father basically raised you and your sisters more than your mother. And can you talk a bit about how that situation happened?
So, that's not entirely true. What happened was my mother, my father became obsessed. He was given a year to live when I was maybe a year or two old, something like this.
Oh my gosh.
And, and so he was desperate. My father was a very tenacious, very driven, ambitious guy, and very smart, self-taught. He spent a number of years in Africa, but he was on a mission he wasn't taking no for an answer, to live, basically. He wanted to live.
Yeah.
And so I think that was very disruptive of the family life. And I think my mother, as supportive as she was a very compassionate, loving creature. She would sit so quietly in the garden, birds would come and land on her shoulder. I mean, she was that kind of person where she just exuded love and peace, and everybody who came around her was like, wow, your mom doesn't have a mean bone in her body. I've never met a sweeter woman in my life. But I think my mother had just kind of had it, the relationship. My father became so focused on just his survival, and and my father had later on in life had said, I did some things to your mom I shouldn't have done, and I don't blame her. And so I'm not upset with either one of them about it, but it was just one of those things that happened. Yeah. And I spent, I did the real adventurous, fun things a lot with my father. My mother wasn't as adventurous, and my mother didn't really read books. My father wrote books, but my mother was very loving. I have photographs of her just, wrapped herself around me, and every day she'd tell me how much she loved me. I mean, every day. I never went a day without hearing, "Babe, I love you. You're the best thing in the world to me." So I had that as a kid growing up. But my mother made some decisions with other men, and she ended up losing a house and living in a trailer on food stamps. And I ran away and went with my father. It was kind of a legal thing. And so I didn't see my mother for quite some time.
Yeah.
But we reunited and reconnected. And she was really apologetic. And it's just one of those things. But I think it made me a more compassionate, caring person.
I'm sure of it, James. And none of us, no matter how much we think we can put ourselves in another person's situation, especially when you're dealing with the dynamics that your folks were dealing with in their own lives and each other's lives. I salute both of their memories. Moving on to...
I used to tell my mother I'm going to come see her. That's in Death Valley. Isn't that cool?
Oh, yeah. It's gorgeous. And to see, for a lot of us, to have a childhood picture like this, to have a father who is a photographer, and capture moments like this that are iconic. I mean, this is world-class photography.
Yeah, my dad he had a Nikon in his hands until he couldn't use his hands anymore.
I know the feeling of having a Nikon in my hand. My mom worked for the Nikon Corporation for many years, and that's a hell of a piece of machinery. But it's enough to kill a cat if you drop it off a table. One of the things that I love in terms of a continuum with you and your dad, and your sisters and your dad, and you and Ollie, your son, and he's pushing about 6 years old now.
Yes, he is. It's funny. You got that picture of me in Death Valley, and I'm looking at a picture of me on the wall over here that's so similar. Ollie and I definitely have a lot of resemblance, although he does resemble Rebecca as well. But we definitely. I've said to him before, I've shown him photographs of me when I was his age.
Yeah,
and I said, Ollie, do you know who this is? And he goes, yeah, that's me. I'm like, no, it's Daddy.
That Fox DNA is strong stuff. But one of the things I loved is, you share with us on social media every once in a while a wonderful picture of Ollie, and you have since he was an itty bitty thing. And I love, if we're lucky, we have a memory of one of our parents or some loving relative throwing us up in the air, and then, of course, hopefully catching us when we come down. And pictures of you doing that with Ollie. So when I saw this photo, which is one of your sisters who apparently defies gravity.
Yeah, my dad was very proud of that shot. He blew it up. I grew up with that photograph in our living room, blown up 4 by 6 feet.
Well, my first thought, I burst into laughter thinking, okay, it's like you're skeet shooting and you're pulling the skeet thing, then you're picking up the shotgun. Now, throw in the air really, really high, then pick up the camera, then take the camera, put it down, and then catch her? What the heck? I mean...
Isn't that great?
It's a beautiful picture.
I know. Oh, yeah.
Holy moly. Talk about a little boy, well, a boy's dream. Are you kidding me?
Oh, my God. Yeah. Are you kidding? I was like, I was bubbling. I remember that day. And I remember bubbling. You're going to let me sit in that car? Are you kidding me? I was beyond excited.
I don't know if this rings a bell for you. I know very little about the world of racing, but I do know that probably the best known and most successful racing school for professional drivers or wannabe professional drivers is the Bondurant School. Does that ring a bell for you?
I went there.
Okay. I went there and did a photo essay. A friend of mine, it was a dream of his, and he took a course of a period of time, and I just stayed there with him. And from dawn till dark, I just shot hundreds of photos, and I was in heaven, and I'm not a car guy. What an amazing experience that was. Okay, so you studied there. I get it.
I went around the track with Bob Bondurant.
I spent time with him there, definitely. Were you much of a reader as a kid, James? I mean, you're such an active outdoor kid.
My father pushed the reading very hard.
Good.
And I had an issue with my eyes where I'm trying to remember the exact terminology, but it was very strange for me because my eyes didn't level on the same plane. So when you're relaxed, if you're relaxed, your eyes aren't level, if that makes sense. It's very slight. Yeah. And I wore corrective lenses, but reading was always really, really hard for me. Like a lot of people, it would be a real pleasure to sit down, but I would get headaches because and we didn't know what was wrong. And my dad took me to an optometrist, and then he determined what the problem was. And I went did this training, and I wore glasses. I wore a patch, Oh boy! I read a lot more as an adult than I did as a kid.
Yeah. Were you? I mean, you became a filmmaker, but yes. Did that happen later in life, so to say, or were you a kid who loved movies and documentaries or, entertainment movies? Do you remember the first movie you saw in a movie theater as a kid?
Gosh, I would, going to the movies was a real novelty. My mother was very, very broke. She was a cocktail waitress when I was in Reading. I have to be honest, I don't remember going to any movies when I was in Reading, but I do remember with my father going to see Star Wars, and that was the most exciting childhood memory. I mean, it was just, I think I saw it 11 times. I mean, it was, it was so exciting. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like movie. We didn't have TV at our house. My father eventually had a little TV that he would shut behind a thing, and he would only watch the McNeil News Hour.
Oh boy,
News Hour and 60 Minutes, and that was it. And we had an antenna that an ear. What is it called? Bunny ear or something? It used to go up.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Stand outside, and I used to rotate it towards the city. We'd get like 2 channels, and I'd go to friends' house, and they'd have like cable or satellite. It was like, oh my God, look at all this TV. And I just for the first time got a TV about 2 weeks ago.
No kidding.
I swear to you, I just literally bought it. I could never watch myself on any. I would go to someone else's house, but I didn't really like watching myself. I haven't even watched my own film, The Phenomenon, since I finished it.
Wow.
But I do like documentaries. Like what I watch. I don't. People can judge me all they want, but I watch 60 Minutes and I watch Frontline because I just study the techniques, and I love the feeling, the gravitas, the credibility of that reporting, and I feel like it's so missed in today's news, and it's not even news anymore. It's more like infotainment or people's opinions, and the real journalism is disappearing, and it's frightfully depressing to me. And I've always thought, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, they're tried and true formats. You inherited, I think, a great trait there from your dad. I grew up in what they used to call the golden age of television, although I think the past years have given us a tremendous amount of high quality entertainment, if not strictly objective news. And I gave up my cable a year and a half ago. I have YouTube that takes me all kinds of places through a pair of gifts. I have Amazon and Netflix, so that covers all my entertainment when I have time to watch. But I think this is wonderful. My grandniece is being raised to understand that looking at screens is not healthy for children, and that when she gets older, she can. But she's never played with an iPhone. She's never watched television. She doesn't watch movies, but she reads, and she is a voracious reader, and she has a large and growing CD library of quite a variety of music. I think your father instilled a great habit in you. I was curious to know when you actually, if you remember the first documentary or documentaries that really affected you. I mean, we're talking about a huge world. I was telling you that when I was a kid, there was a documentary series. I think CBS made it. I'm not sure. It was very high class with classical music. It was called Victory at Sea. And it was just a long series of documentaries about the Navy in World War II. Then I'm thinking, for a lot of Americans, Ken Burns is sort of the touchstone.
Of course, Ken Burns. Yeah.
But then you have people.
Thin Blue Line made a very deep.
I was going to say Earl Morris and people like I'm blanking right now, but there are a variety of styles and filmmakers and approaches. I love great documentaries, even if it's not about something that I'm totally fascinated by. If it's a great documentary, it fills in all the space around it, like Burns often does. And I'm not a baseball fan, but I thought the series, for example, was terrific because of all the social history and all the wonderful images, and of course, the voice of Peter Coyote, the great voice of documentary filmmaking. Do you remember what documentary or documentaries first impacted on you?
I would watch, because that's something that my father, my dad had all the Ken Burns stuff, history of baseball, history of jazz, Civil War. It just went on, and he would have a whole collection of VHS tapes, and we would sit down and watch docs. I'm trying to think back on all the Frontline documentaries. I would study it on how they'd go about it, and you'd asked me earlier about some of the things that kind of made an impression on me, or why it was that how it was it came about that I got into documentary filmmaking. Well, I'd seen my father, having grown up with him, traveling and doing these different stories, interviewing people and writing and writing for these publications. And that process was a very, I mean, it was shockingly difficult, you know, and I studied how my father would do it. And he had as his hands grew less and less effective, he had a tape recorder. Then he would go to places and he would take detailed notes on the scenery. And he would think about like how I could put my readers here, you know, and so he would take detailed notes about the scenery of a gentleman's house we're going to interview, so he can describe it to a T, the driveway, the fountain in the garden, the different trees growing. I mean, that sort of thing. And he was so descriptive, and I was so impressed. And I remember thinking, God, I could never be that smart. I could never be. My dad is so good. And he put sentences together that was just genius. I just thought, how does this man play with words the way he does? I was so impressed. And I'd say to my dad, like, how do you do it? Like, how did you? He said, James, it was a lot of hard work. And he said, I was a ferocious reader. Like, I couldn't not read. He'd say I'd sit in a bathroom and I'd read the roll of toilet paper, everything else, the cereal box, like everything. Like, yes. I get a book and I can't get enough of it, of the information. You know, I thought that's fascinating. And
it's beautiful.
And I remember thinking as a child, and so I had that on my father's side, and my father pushed the reading. You know, I remember reading Old Man in the Sea, and I remember reading the poem If, right, Kipling, and
yes.
and with my grandmother was also, she raised 4 kids in Africa, teaching all the children, and she was an avid reader, and she would come and read to me all these, Baldwin and all these different writers. And my grandma, I got that from my mother and my dad's side, but it was always very strained for me. It didn't come easy. I had to work really hard, and I had difficult times keeping up with everybody else. But getting back to what you're saying, I picked up a camera when I was 20. It was a video camera, and I remember thinking, this is an amazing medium, because you can document something and immediately play it back. And I thought, what a wonderful way to report on something. And I picked up, I didn't have the money at the time, but a friend of mine had a camera, and I asked him if I can borrow it for a couple of weeks. Very good friend of mine. We're still friends to this day. And he said, of course, you know, and I took it around and I documented my life and my friends. And I thought, wow, it's a great medium, you know, and it really excited me. And that was right on the cusp of the tail end of linear editing. So I learned linear editing, tape to tape editing, and it was just making the transition over during that, 5-6 year window, 10 if you really want to get picky, to non-linear editing. And that opened up a whole new medium for people like myself to, make it affordable. Like prior to that, a proper broadcast camera and edit studio would have, you couldn't, unless you were a gazillionaire, you couldn't afford it, know? And so that I guess I was in the right place at the right time, and I picked up that habit, and I thought, this is just a wonderful tool. And I just loved doing that. I learned how to operate my own camera. I ended up learning how to do editing tape to tape, eventually made the transition over to non-linear editing. And I did everything from public service announcements, AIDS awareness, migratory songbirds. And then I said, you know what? I'm doing a documentary on UFOs. And that's, and it's really funny, actually, because my dad was super supportive. I remember growing up with him. He was, very loving family. My mother and my father were so supportive and so wonderful. There was never a lack of love and support and compassion and adventure and all these things. And when I told my dad that I was going to do a doc, and I've shared this before, on UFOs, I was shocked at how unsupportive he was, because he used to say to me, I'll never forget it. He goes, son, I don't mind if you want to be a garbage man, a painter, a janitor, or a lawyer. I just want you to be happy, son. That's the most important thing. Is that your time is valuable. Don't let anybody waste it, and you need to be happy. And when I told him I wanted to do a documentary on UFOs, he was just absolutely adamantly against me wasting my life. Isn't that funny?
Yes and no. One of my specialties in my research over the years has been not just the power of ridicule in deploying against the UFO subject, but the origins of UFO ridicule and how incredibly effective it was from 1947, quite honestly, up until about 3 years ago. It
Yeah.
is changing. But
Yeah.
part of it is, I don't want you to do this because you'll embarrass yourself. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. Everybody knows that if you say you're interested in it, they're going to look at you and think, do you want to feel special? Are you a joker? Are you trying to con somebody? Are you delusional? Are you a religious maniac? Do you think you can make a buck off this? For me, that in itself is fascinating because it's so counterintuitive, as opposed to, I saw something in the sky that I can't explain, and I'd like to know what it was. The most natural response should be, like the title of one of your fine documentaries, I know what I saw. And it wasn't like anything I ever saw before. How did that get wired up with all these contrary ideas? And your father was simply just a man of his time who that was instilled into him the way it was probably instilled into his dad when the first reports in 1947 started to make their way to England. So that doesn't surprise me, and how poignant. And I can only imagine how proud he was once he realized this is serious and you're doing a great job of it.
I've shared that part too. My dad went to Africa. It's funny. We had a family reunion in Europe a couple years ago, and I realized one of my big regrets with my grandmother, and I had cameras back then, and I did document my grandmother somewhat. I need to dig those tapes out. I think they're under the house somewhere. But one of my big regrets was I didn't sit my grandmother down and really pick at her brain about the historical stuff. But I realized this a couple years ago, and I sat my dad's older sister Liz down, who was 10 years older than my father, who was born in 1932, who remembers, wonderful woman, she remembers being in England in the early 40s during the invasion and the Battle of Britain, and the tanks rolling through the village and running outside as a little girl and giving them tea and coffee and I said, Liz, I would love to get you on camera if you wouldn't mind, and I can film you and for an hour or two, and just tell me about your childhood with your brother and my father.
Yes.
My son's grandfather. Tell me about life in England. Tell me about life in Africa. Why did you guys go to Africa? How long did you live in Africa?
Exactly.
All these questions. When did he decide to come to the States? Because, I didn't think about sitting them down and figuring and asking all those details. I had little bits and pieces, of course, but getting the whole thing out. And so I sat my dad's older sister Liz down a couple of years ago, and I got it primarily for my son, for him to know all these things. And I know that my father did go from England to Kenya in 1949 and spent probably 6 years in Kenya when he spoke Swahili and post-colonialism stuff that his father, my great-grandfather, or my grandfather, my son's great-grandfather, was involved in. But primarily my grandmother was raising kids on her own, sleeping at night with a sawed-off shotgun, protecting from any potential invasion. And, my grandmother was tough as nails. I mean, she was the only woman in her 80s I've ever seen or ever even heard of that had a 30-something-year-old with a sweet, lovely temperament, cocked with a fist clenched and ready to knock her block off. And having my grandmother, basically like, you bloody well try it. My grandmother, stop. She was tough as nails. My grandmother, she was amazing. She had this, you rapscallion, you skiver, you hooligan, you scoundrels coming and breaking the house down all evening of the night. She had this British accent, and my grandmother could drive a car and roll a cigarette with one hand. And I said, Grandma, Jesus, how did you learn how to do that? She'd drive the car.
And I thought you were the talented person in the family.
God.
Holy moly.
My grandmother would have a whiskey every night, and she had to climb up this big, thick rope, almost vertical staircase. I've got a staircase over here you probably can't see, but my grandmother would go up something almost vertical into her 80s. Like she was a one of a kind. I would meet people, friends of my father's, and they would say, "Oh, your father, yes. Is his mom still alive?" Boy, I met her one time back in 1963, and I'll never forget that lady.
Hold that thought, James. Hold that thought. This is Peter Robbins on Meanwhile Here on Earth with my amazing guest, James Fox. Visit the film website, thephenomenonfilm.com, and we'll be right back in about 3 minutes.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Are you still at it?
Yeah, I need more speed.
This baby's fast.
My dad's fast. He's scary fast.
You really think you could beat him?
Yeah, because I drink more tea than he does.
Yeah, right.
You know, pal, it's the tea that makes you go. Oh. Hey, Dad.
You know, kiddo, you have to drink a lot more tea to be faster than me.
Drink the tea that makes you go. Life Change Tea. You may not need as much as Dad. You never know. GetTheTea.com. Log on to GetTheTea.com.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button. So just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
This is Peter Robbins back with you on Meanwhile Here on Earth. And as we can see, Mr. James Fox has just been reseated.
Afterwards.
Hey. I
got a jacket.
Looking
It's a little
sharp.
chilly in here. A little chilly in here.
I was going to say, reminiscent of one of a zillion Mark Twain quotes of the coldest winter I ever spent in my life was the summer I spent. Exactly. Yeah. In central New York State, we're in much the same zone, but I wish I had your views.
So I don't, just for the record, I live about, well, you said this earlier, but I live about an hour north on the coast. We get all that coastal, a lot of coastal fog that comes in.
Yeah.
It can be quite a wee bit nippy.
Yeah. Exactly, and amazingly evocative. Talk about an amazingly photographic area. there's really nothing quite like it in my experience. It's almost special effects level fog at times.
I'm trying to see. Yeah, I've got photographs of me as a child running on the running on the beach here. But I'll tell you, I had the distinct honor of meeting this gentleman who has a house right up the street from where I live now, where I've lived for a while, and he was the president of the Sierra Club, Ed Wayburn, back in the 60s. I believe it was the 60s. And he said, yeah, I was with the Sierra Club and they could really get stuff done. He was probably 101 when I met him.
Wow.
And he was walking by my front of my house with a walker, and my neighbor is a good friend of mine, called me and he said, you know, you're not going to believe who's out there right now. He doesn't come out very often. He lives in a home in San Francisco, but he's in your town and he's walking by your house. You might want to meet, you know. So I dropped everything and I ran outside, and there was Mr. Wayburn, and he was one of the primary driving forces for the creation of all the open space that's all around me, the park, Point Reyes National Seashore, Golden Gate National Recreation Center. And I ran outside and I said, Mr. Wayburn, it's such an honor to meet you.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. There's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't appreciate the hard work and dedication that you and others did to create this, you know, to have the vision of preserving this amazing place. And he very painstakingly, his voice was too weak to say anything, but he took his glove off and he reached a hand out, and I got to shake his hand and thank him personally. And I think about him all the time. I think about him as when I was a kid playing on the mountain with my father. One of the photographs that you showed earlier that's Mount Tamalpais. That was going to be freeways and condos.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And when you think about San Francisco and the greater San Francisco area, since the advent of the tech revolution and the insane real estate value, and how, had that been, you know, kind of a Wild West situation, Bolinas would be a memory in old photographs, and it would be a zillion condos and, you know, block views and just another bedroom community, and not a very nice place to live. People like that, you know, you talk about people that make a difference in this world, and you had a chance to acknowledge it. And for me, again, the fact that some of your earliest memories are there. You grew up there. You kept returning to there. You live there now. You're giving your son a chance to have some of the same experiences you did and the same views that you had. So God bless this gentleman. And I wanted to get back to talking about your dad. You said he was diagnosed with MS when you were a year old and given a year to live?
I was about a year old. So, or right around the time I was born. Something like that,
It is, as you know better than most people, such an insanely insidious disease, and it just keeps taking from you. The fact that, you know, you are, I think for most people that meet you, and it's really you, it's no affect, you are such a upbeat, positive person. You have times that you're not feeling that way, for sure, for all the right reasons. But I'm reminded of a line from Dickens. I think it was Great Expectations, but it was, the best steel goes through the hottest fire. As you're growing up and a vital kid with other kids, with dads who are, you know, doing physical stuff with them, your dad's on the decline. And you not only had compassion instilled in you and empathy, but the normal role of a father watching over and taking care of a son was sort of switched around. And I thought about the film Benjamin Button in passing, that as a father and son, you know, he, in terms of what he instilled in you, the values, lessons, observations from him, but you were there physically for him in a way that for the next person over, oh, I can't do that. It's just too weird. It makes me too sad. I can't do it. I'm so upset. And you embraced it. And it's one of the things I love about you and admire about you. the Yiddish word a mensch comes to mind. And how long after that diagnosis did your dad actually live, defying that 1 year mortality projection?
Well, he was living in the city. He was living in, we were living in Brooklyn at the time. My dad was pursuing his career in writing. His bread and butter were articles on racing, but he had bigger things in mind. He was also working for a magazine, True Magazine, which is defunct now. Yeah, and he had covered some amazing true life stories that he ended up making novels about later on that almost got made into a feature length film. But he pursued the leading neurologist on the planet at the time, and ultimately landed an interview, an interview with him, but a meeting with him. And the guy said, "Look, to be honest with you, there's really nothing we can do. If I were you, I'd pick a nice, cool climate with good air quality, and live out your life to the best of your ability. And that's really the best advice I can give you." And so my father had seen Bolinas back in the early 60s. And he remembered that cool climate coming off the ocean, and in striking distance to a city or an airport. And so he decided that Bolinas was where he's going to move to, and that's what he did.
The way that people get involved in the subject of UFOs, there's only a certain number of variations. You had a sighting, you had an experience. You read something, you saw a film. Somebody that you know and respect and admire and believe, they shared something with you. In one case, a good friend of mine who grew up in the Ukraine in the old Soviet days, he had an uncle who was a member of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, who took him aside when he was about 12 years old and told him that the subject was serious. I know, but would you share with our viewers and listeners how you became involved in the subject of UFOs?
Well, I got a text message from an old girlfriend of mine, Lisa Reinhardt. I could find it in my phone now. It's fairly recent. In fact, I will, because it's kind of cool. It's basically regarding an incident that happened to me when I was 20 years old, and
with Lisa
Reinhardt, and she texted me just recently, and she texted me on December 14th, and she said that would have been 2020. She said, "I haven't thought about that UFO experience for ages. And this is kind of a random thought, but what if they pegged you somehow or directed you somehow? Have you ever thought about that?" Because the sighting that I had with Lisa wasn't like, I've researched cases where witnesses will say, it landed right there, and
yeah, sure.
And all of a sudden this wasn't like that. It was more nebulous. It was an object, and we could see it, and it was right there. And I remember almost having to squint a little bit, and it was at night out the bedroom window. The weird part about it was the fact that she said, "What the bleep is that?" And I said to her, "I don't know what that is, but whatever it is, I get the feeling it knows we're looking at it." She said, "I feel exactly the same thing." So that was the weird part was that we had some weird, I can't explain it, man. I'm telling you, but it just knew, you knew that it knew that you were looking at it.
Yeah.
Okay? Go figure.
Yeah.
So I had sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, not an uncommon reaction, by the way.
Yeah, and so I had a friend of mine, this guy Renee Harris. We were really close mates. We'd go riding together when we were like 18 years old. We had motorcycles, and we went to high school together. He was good friends with my cousin at a different high school. I went to this one school called Marin Academy for a year. Then I transferred to a public school. He went to another private school called Reardon in San Francisco, and then he went to a public school, this school Tamalpais, and so we both had that in common. He knew my cousin, so we were almost friends the day we met, because he was like, "Oh, I've been going to school with your cousin in the city," and so we became friends, and we went to Europe together when we were 18. We bought a Fiat 131 in London. we had like literally a couple $100 to our name. We bought this old beat up Fiat, and we got a red can of paint and we spray painted the hood. What the hell were we thinking? And we drove this car, and it was so funny. My dad's sister was living in London near Putney Bridge, and she said she was very supportive of this trip. We had this idea we're going to drive to Portugal and do this whole thing, the summer beach thing in Portugal. And she was very supportive, but later in life she said, I didn't think you'd make it to the English Channel. But we did. We made it all the way to Portugal. We ran out of money. We had to siphon gasoline. We had soaked in gasoline, all this trip. We crashed the car into a garbage can. We ended up leaving it on the side of the road. But this wonderful adventure. We took a bus back. Great time in Portugal. And a couple years later, he started telling me about this crash in New Mexico. And, they recovered this thing. And I just thought, Jesus, what a shame. Such a good friend, high school friend, and he's lost his mind.
Oh,
very unfortunate. And
your father's son.
It's just too bad I'm gonna have to cut this guy loose because he's lost his mind. And
fascinating.
Honestly, because I'm like an alien.
Well, the ridicule is instilled. It is culturally instilled up until it started to unwind a few short years ago. This is the way most of us grew up.
Yeah, and so I'll never forget it. I was working as an intern at a video production company in San Francisco, with this gentleman, Ellison Horn, and Richard Van Sickle was one of the primary editors there. He's just he works for like country music in Tennessee now. He's quite well known back there. But anyway, Richard, I had tremendous respect for Richard. He was my mentor, and he was, at the time, he seemed like a seasoned producer. He was probably in his early 30s. I was in my probably 23, 24, something. And I said, oh, yeah, I casually kind of mentioned it. I said, and this is in the early 90s. I was like, yeah, my really good friend, Renee, he's like, really into UFOs. And Richard goes, well, cool. And then I said, oh, well, he's talking about some UFO that crashed in New Mexico back in the 40s. And he goes, oh, yeah, you didn't know about that? And I went, Richard, really? And he goes, oh, yeah, that fully happened. And he knew all about it. I thought, wait a minute. Richard,
interesting.
Yeah, and so anyway, I could go on, but that kind of piqued my interest. And then I went to a few conferences and I met a few people. And then I would say Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Edgar Mitchell were the two most influential, credible individuals that really got me looking into it further.
You think?
Yeah.
I met Dr. Hynek, but Edgar was a friend, and they're credible.
When did you meet Dr. Hynek? What were the circumstances?
I met him in 1983 during in the county just north of greater New York City, Westchester, kind of a bedroom community. There had been, and it's a fairly well-known series of events in ufology, incursions by large triangular-shaped craft. And this was right at the beginning of the home video camera revolution. And
this Hudson Valley?
Yes, exactly. The Hudson Valley events. And a lot of regular folks were filming them. And I lived in Manhattan then, and certainly for most of my life. And it got to the point where, forget about UFO organizations. Local people in the area decided we need to know. And I don't remember how it was organized, but they were given permission to use the auditorium of the biggest high school in the area. I think it was on a Saturday, which would make sense. And it was packed. Hundreds of people showed up, local and not so local. I remember I went up with one of my early mentors, a New York City police detective, Pete Mazzola, and a crack UFO investigator as well. Bud Hopkins also came up, who I was working. I was a friend at the time, certainly, before I really was working for him in earnest. And somebody pointed out a fairly well-known writer named Whitley Strieber. I had never read any of his books, but I knew who he was. And this was 4 years before the publication of Communion. And at a certain point, Pete, who knew Dr. Hynek, said, I want you to meet Alan Hynek. And I was, one step away from that famous Jackie Gleason response of homina, 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 homina. And he was very gracious, and we spent a few minutes talking. He in his tie and jacket, me in my black T-shirt. And I'll never forget it. Edgar is another story, but tonight belongs to you. I want to go back to some of the wonderful photos that you sent. And here's one that I absolutely love. My first thought was, this is the kind of vibration in old pictures of me with my sisters. And this is one of your beautiful sisters. Which one?
Janine. She's my older sister, Janine, and that was in England at my grandmother's 80th birthday.
Ha ha!
Yeah.
Great.
My grandmother got together with her sister, Kitty, and for the first time in 50 years at this event, we all got dressed up, and it was a big family reunion. Everyone came from all the different corners of the world. Oh. We had a lovely week, just a lovely week.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And this photo.
Yes. There's a good friend of mine, Alex Lavery. We met in Thailand, and we were staying in Paris at the time of this photograph was taken, and I was celebrating the success of Out of the Blue. Isn't that
As
funny?
one does.
As one does. This was like 2003, and I think Out of the Blue came out, right around there. Right around there.
I remember. It made an impression on me, that's for sure. In fact, that's when we met. And here's you and Edgar.
Still wearing the same. I'm still wearing the same glasses today.
Hey, if something works for you, stick with it, as John Candy said in Splash.
Those
as
are
he
my
threw.
aviators. I feel naked. I feel naked without my aviators. People say to me, "Oh, those glasses they're out now, right?" And I said, "I don't care." And then like a couple years later, "Oh, those glasses are really in." Great. Okay. And then another 5 years later, "Hey, those glasses are out, right?"
Well,
yeah, here, yeah. That I was. What I was asking Edgar Mitchell right there?
Oh.
I was in my 20s, and I said, "Dr. Mitchell." Of course, I was pinching myself. I couldn't believe that I was with him.
I know.
I said, what ultimately, I had, I don't know how many letters of denial I had for an interview. I mean, I would stack them up. I mean, I had them. Are you kidding me?
Busy guy.
Try to secure interviews with different people. I spent years.
Yep.
But he said to me, it was really funny. I thought it was going to be some complex, how impressed he was. He goes, "Well, James, I suddenly realized that you wouldn't go away." That was it. No, he wasn't impressed with anything I did.
Tenacity pays off. Obnoxiousness can serve. That's hysterical.
Isn't that funny? You wouldn't
talk to this kid already and be done with it. I love it.
Get this guy out of the way.
That's the best.
That was it.
You reminded me. At one point I had the honor, along with about a dozen close friends of Edgar Mitchell's, of having dinner with him at his home in his kitchen. And he was so generous with his time and showing us around, and you can imagine the memorabilia in the house.
Oh yeah.
And at one point he's showing me a framed formal portrait with very nice Gothic lettering of an aircraft carrier, the aircraft carrier that picked him and his comrades up when they splashed down in Apollo 14. And, it was a big ceremony, of course, and they're each given one of these things. I said, "Yeah, that's really nice." He said, "Look at it." And I look at it and I go, "Edgar, E-G-A-R, Edgar, they spelled your name wrong?" He looked at me and said, "Can you believe it?"
Oh my gosh. That is funny. Let go by Egger.
He was, probably the only person we'll know who happened to walk on the moon. And I remember at one point, quiet moment in his living room after dinner, was pouring out. I mean, it was raining so hard. I was starting to think, gee, we're all going to have to sleep here on the couches and things. Won't that be terrible? Unfortunately, the rain stopped. But I said, the capsule that you returned in, a remarkable piece of machinery, let's say 80,000 moving parts, each part manufactured by the lowest bidder to the United States government. Did there ever come a time when you felt, he cut me off mid-sentence, James, and he said, no, it was absolutely no doubt in my mind that we were going to return successfully. We were too well trained. Failure was not an option. And I thought,
wow.
Given your options, that's the attitude to have. And if by any chance it fails, it's going to happen very quickly.
Wow.
But yeah, a man who we were very lucky to get to spend time with, for sure.
When I sat down with him at his house, and we were getting ready to do the interview. Never thought that interview would have grown the legs that it has. He said, James, what would you like me to wear? And before I had time to censor my own mouth, I promise you, I don't know how this came out.
Your spacesuit, of course.
I said, how about a pink nightie? And my face went beet red, and I went, oh my God, what did I just do? And I just the moment seemed like eternity, and I thought I just blew this interview.
This is where I die.
I can't believe I just said that, and he almost fell off his chair laughing. And I thought, wow, here's this amazing guy, and he's also got such a great sense of humor.
I was going to say, one of my favorite moments marking his sense of humor, like a lot of people, he had a bunch of throw pillows on his couches, and the one that totally cracked me up is beautiful petty point embroidering, and it said, if they can send a man to the moon, why not all of them?
Oh my God!
Given to him by a girlfriend, and I just roared. I mean,
oh my God, that's funny.
A great man as well as a great guy. And speaking about sophisticated pieces of machinery.
Oh yes, I know. I had that. That was my XR 650L.
Ooh.
It's a dirt bike with it's sort of an enduro. It goes well in the street and the dirt. And oh boy, my heart broke when I sold that. And I did it because I'm a dad, obviously, and Rebecca, my son's mother, just really freaks her out. Motorcycles just terrify her. And even though I've been riding since I was 4 or 5 years old,
doesn't matter.
You know what? It doesn't matter. I've had a great run. I can do it later in life. I got a son to raise, and I got a partner to keep happy, and off it goes.
Right.
So
and, one of the things for me when I think back on it, and we're best known in our work for dealing with the subject of UFOs, but in different capacities. And we've both been lucky enough to get to travel, in some cases quite a lot, as part of the work. For me, I don't know how you feel about it, but the two greatest overall perks when I look back on 40 years in this crazy field is some of the most remarkable and remarkably decent and memorable people I will ever meet in my life that I would have never met otherwise, and some of the extraordinary places it's allowed me to travel to. And I was curious to know, you've traveled extensively in this work, more than most people, and in your other documentary filmmaking. Can you share with us a place or two that you were lucky enough to visit that if you had a chance that you would go back to at the drop of a hat?
Russia, China, Africa. I remember arriving in Russia in the 90s in the winter. And we got to the parking lot at the airport, looking for the car, and it was so cold, and I didn't recognize any of the writing. Like, I'd been to Europe and I'd lived in Paris for a couple of years. I speak French. I could always like recognize things and at least make some level of interpretation. Not in Russia. I was looking at things and I thought, I can't read anything. I feel like I might as well be on an alien planet somewhere.
Cyrillic doesn't translate at all. Yeah.
It was so cold
Yeah.
that honestly, I think my spit would freeze before it hit the ground. And I remember thinking, if we don't find this car, A, I'm not going to be able to talk to anybody. And B, I think I'm going to die out here. And it was like another world. But I'd grown up in the Cold War and hearing about, Russia bad, and the level of hospitality and kindness from the locals everywhere. I went to Star City, Russia. I went to a place called Mineral Water outside of Chechnya, all around Moscow, Red Square. And I remember, I don't know, maybe 10 years after that kid landed his airplane in Red Square in Moscow.
What a mind-bending location that is, to just turn around, do a 360 standing in the middle of Red Square.
Yeah, and the architecture, just everything was different. And but it was a fascinating time. And I was working on my second film, Out of the Blue, and I remember the position. They thought I was Fox News, and so I remember I know.
Well, in a way you are.
Yeah, in a way I am.
An independent branch.
Yes. So I remember my translator looked at me. He goes, "Just let it go. Don't make it." We had like police escorts, and they held the airplane for us one time when we were trying to leave this place, Mineral Water. We were drinking cognac and vodka, and I remember when I was in Star City, I was with General Alexeyev and Pavel Popovich, the cosmonaut. And, they brought out, I want to say at the time, I think it was cognac. I wish I could remember. I think it was a special cognac. But
no doubt.
But it could have been some vodka. There was vodka too, but definitely some cognac. And they wanted to drink cognac before the interview.
Oh, no.
I thought to myself, man, we should get this interview in the can first. But then my translator said, when they make toast, you drink. It's that simple. You're not going to say no, you're not. So I'm doing lots of cognac, and my camera guy, this guy Damien's also doing shots of cognac. We all were, and I'm getting progressively
when in Rome,
more drunk, and I'm thinking, Jesus, we got to get this camera working, get the lights. Like, I got to interview this guy. I got the translator. I'm looking at the guy going, we're doing shots, and they would make a toast, and then they would drink it, and then there was a guy who would stand there and pour your glass and fill it again.
That's right.
And so I did this one interview, and it was the only one where I was drunk. We were all drunk, and the camera guy was drunk, and as a result of it, it ended up to be half blurry because and I'm desperately trying to cover this stuff up in the edit room, and we salvaged it for the movie Out of the Blue. But I tell you, if you take a close look, you're going to see some of that stuff blurry.
Without taking more than 20 seconds, we had very different experiences in Russia. I was there years before you. Basically, a kid with a pack on my back coming back from India, entered through Iran, had my paperwork done in Kabul, Afghanistan, at the height of the Cold War and anti-Semitism. And the people, when they knew I was an American, were not kind. But I did have a wonderful evening where I did have a true sense, because I am primarily Russian Jewish, a number of Black African students that were leaving on the same ship that I was going to Copenhagen, they were going to the UK, befriended me. They were all studying medicine and law and things like that, sons of tribal chiefs and the like. Everybody loved them. Their Russian was flawless, and they took me drinking my last night in Leningrad. And I'm drinking, they're drinking. We're at a large round table with maybe 20 other people, all different ages. And at a certain point, I see the people starting to really look at me. And they said, Peter, we were sorry about the experiences you've had so far with the Russian people. They're lovely people. And we wanted you to know them as we do and have at least one positive experience We hope you don't mind. We told them a little white lie. Well, what did you tell them? That you are a friend of ours, that you're Cuban, because Cubans look every possible way, and you're a physical therapist. And if you could stand up and say something to them in Spanish, I think you'll see the warmth of the Soviet people. I stood up as well as I could, like you. I wasn't drinking, I was drunk. And I think I said, if not words to this effect, hasta luego, mañana taco, Chihuahua, ay caramba, ole.
Si, senor.
Everybody got up and they formed a line in front of me. Teenagers, old people, factory workers, some intellectuals. Each one embraced me, kissed me on both cheeks. One of the great nights of my life. Working on a film like your last film, which, am I correct that this is it still in the category of the phenomenon, is it still the most streaming documentary in the world as it was for some months, or just still up there as one of the most?
So it's been in the top 10. Last week it was number 3. Today it's like number 10, but it's been the top 10 with banners, as early as yesterday. And I could look at it now and tell you there's the banner still right there.
Wow.
On iTunes right now. So there it is.
Okay. My question for you is, you worked with some really heavy hitters in terms of people that you approach for content. And 2 of them, major players, current and past, Harry Reid and Christopher Mellon. Did you have a desire to push further in terms of your questioning with them, but felt reticent? That thing of, I really want to ask you harder questions than I am right now, but I don't want to blow it and have you freeze up. For me, I would have loved it if you could have pushed a little further, but I absolutely understand you can only, it's like dowsing. You're just sort of feeling the energy, and how far can I go in asking this person a question without putting them on the defensive?
I've done that. There's sort of an art to it. You got to read the room, right? And I remember doing it early on with Governor Fife Symington.
Oh yeah,
former governor of Arizona.
Yeah,
and he granted me an interview, probably around 2006. And for those of you who don't know who he is, he was the Arizona governor from the infamous 1997 March 13th massive UFO flyover of the state of Arizona. They call it the Phoenix Lights, but you talk to the witnesses, it's not the Phoenix Lights. It was these craft that flew over. So some of them would get very frustrated.
In fact, James, let me jump in for one moment and say that the thing about Fife Symington was he did a press conference shortly after thousands of people had seen this massive triangular craft pass slowly over Phoenix. And we thought it was going to be a serious, press statement. And it very quickly degenerated into something extremely insulting as far as I was concerned, where he says, I'm going to bring out somebody right now to explain, or I forget his wording, and out comes somebody in an alien costume. Ha ha, very funny. Yes, it was great that he apologized 10 years later. It was great that he made a statement that he was a witness to at the time, but yet he allowed that ridicule. He played into it. I'm apologize for jumping in, but this was very personal to me. But continue on.
Well, I was investigating that story for Out of the Blue
right
in the night. And so I talked to his constituents. I talked to people that voted for him, and they were livid because on the one hand, he did come out and he said, look, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to launch an investigation. We're going to determine, what this thing was. He didn't admit at the time that he had seen it himself, that he was a witness. But he did come across seriously, like he was like he was doing something about it. And then later that day, suspiciously, he scheduled there was an unscheduled press conference, and that's when he had one of his aides dressed up in an alien suit. Apparently, his aide really didn't want to do it, and he claims to this day that he wanted to add some levity to a panicking situation. I'm not entirely convinced of that, but I've first of all, I do like him a lot. Governor Simonton and I get along very well. We stay in touch a lot. And I've had some drinks with him, and I've asked him point blank, come on, man, tell me you got a phone call. Like, why did you take it seriously 1 minute and then the next thing you're doing? And he adamantly says he did not get a phone call, that he was just terribly concerned about the
I understand.
Nature, that kind of thing. And he wanted to
He's a politician. He made a judgment call.
But what a missed opportunity that would have been. Could you imagine what would have happened?
It would have been.
Well, we had so much going on. We had John Mack. We had the 50th anniversary of Roswell.
That's right.
Had the landing case in Africa. We had the crash in Virginia. We had the Rockefeller Initiative with the Clinton administration. Yeah. There was a lot of wonderful, headway being made.
Both bet.
The phenomenon, but also publicly and through the media, that was getting a lot of attention, and that could have been, not to say definitively it would have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but it certainly wouldn't have hurt. And speaking of broke the camel's back, I see a lovely cat jumping around over there. Hi, buddy.
This is my roommate, my pandemic buddy, my secretary, and the person who I am self-isolated with. I say person because I can't distinguish anymore.
Of course.
Hi, baby. Welcome to the show, as usual. I had a question for you, and this is a story you told me some years ago. We were just spending time together in Arizona, and you shared this story with me. It knocked me out, in part because, again, I can't even imagine, no matter how positive an attitude I have in life, if I was living in your dad's body and realizing not only are things not going to get any better or stay the same, they're just going to get worse. But you know what? I am living my life. Screw this. I am still here, and I'm going to enjoy what I can and get work done that I can. It had to do with an event that I guess it was past President Jimmy Carter was speaking at, and that you very much wanted to get a statement from Carter on UFOs. But how do you do it? Dad, would you tell us that story of how your father assisted in making this happen, to put it mildly?
It's too bad that I didn't give you that clip to play, because it's really funny. I mean, it really is. And I will remind your audience that if any of you have seen the phenomenon, or you want to see the phenomenon, you can rent it from the cheapest place possible, probably Amazon. If you decide to buy it, you can get it from iTunes or Vimeo, and it comes with the scene I'm about to describe.
Oh, great.
Material. Yeah, I got 3 hours of bonus material at no additional cost.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I just saw the regular film. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, and so I provided that because it was just a wonderful little side note. People don't realize, like, oh, you got Carter on camera saying that he not only saw a UFO, but that he looked into it during his presidency. It's like, I don't think you realize what it took to actually get that to happen, because
I was going to say,
I probably have maybe 2.5 years of letters of no thank you from his secretary, and finally I was like, look, this is not going to happen. So he had just written a book, and he was going on book tour, and so I looked at his schedule, and he was going to be speaking in a place called Stacy's Bookstore in San Francisco, and I thought, well, that's just an hour away for me. Maybe an hour and 15 minutes. I can drive there. And the morning of, I was going to go with my co-producer, Tim Coleman. The morning of, my dad was like, I'd have nobody to look after me for the day. And I thought, oh, Dad, I'm going to be, I've got these, I think we either had fake press badges, or we're going to pose like we're in the press, and we're going to take pictures and ask him a question about UFOs. That was our plan. And so I told my dad, and he's like, well, I'd really appreciate it if you could look after me for the day. I'll come with you. It'll be an adventure. And, love my dad, but it added a whole new element, bringing a guy in a wheelchair and his van and parking and wheeling him in and all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
But anyway, we decided, yeah, what the heck? Yes, you're coming with us. So we got there, and we got there early, and we went up. It was a 2-level bookstore. We got to the second level, which is where the whole thing's going to happen, and the lines were filling up quickly. I mean, it was like people were showing up to meet, former President Carter, and it was quite a scene. And they said, look, there will be no press conference. We thought there was going to be. There will be known. We were going to do it. Too many people. We can't do it. The line was going from the second floor, which is where the event was happening, and down the stairs, through the whole first floor below, and then out onto the street and down the sidewalk 2.5 blocks. So they were like, basically, you can take a picture of him, but you cannot take a picture with him. You can't ask him any questions. We got to keep this line moving. And we were just scratching our heads going, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to do this? And we were probably, I don't know, maybe about 100 people deep in the line on the second floor. And my dad was the only person in a wheelchair. And we're sitting there we're scratching our heads. And the Secret Service and former president, you still call him President Carter, right?
Oh, sure.
Yep. So President Carter arrives, Secret Service, and you could just see. I mean, the feeling in the room with the presence when he walked in, and he made everyone, Mr. President, and he made a beeline for my dad, who's sitting there.
Big mistake.
No, he did. He came over to my father, and he touched my father's shoulder, and just acknowledged, "Hi, just touched my father's shoulder." I thought, what a compassionate man.
Yeah.
And Tim and I looked at each other, and we thought, right, we've got a plan. What we're going to do is we're going to wire my father up with a wireless mic, run that signal back to a receiver on my camera, and I'm going to stand at the back of the room, and we're going to wheel my dad up, being the compassionate person he is, and we're going to buy, I don't bore your audience, but we're going to buy as many books as we can afford. It's going to take him a while to sign those books, so we know we'll have at least 45 seconds at the table, right? So we had a stack of books on my dad's lap. I'm not kidding you. And I'm at the back, and I can't hear a damn thing.
Oh no!
No idea what's going on. I couldn't get the mic. Whatever. And I said, "Look, it's either going to work or it's not going to work." I couldn't monitor the audio. I had no idea what was being said, and I'm all the way at the back of the other side of the room. And I see them inching themselves closer and closer to the desk where they had Secret Service. They had maybe a press secretary, whoever, standing next to him. And he's signing away, and he's come on, keep the books coming. He's signing, and keep the books coming. He's signing. And I was standing in the back there, and I'm trying to get a straight line with the camera because people keep stepping in front of me and stuff. So I'm moving over to one side to another. And I see my dad. Okay, my dad's my heart's kind of pounding a little bit. It's getting exciting. And, I don't think you could ever get away with that now because it's post 9/11. This is back in the 90s.
Yeah.
It just looked like we were making a bomb in the back of the room and we were putting the whole thing together. Just super.
And he's wired.
My dad is wired. He's got this mic, but he had a voice amplification system that kind of went along with that. So whatever. So I'm in the back and I'm just praying to God it's going well, but I have no idea. And I'm looking through the eyepiece of my camera and I'm zooming in. There's a rocker arm on the top, and I'm zooming in and I'm looking, and I'm just focusing on the shot, like just trying to get the shot. And I'm going back and forth because people are kind of walking in front of me, and I'm doing this, and I see it's happening, and I see President Carter, gesturing to keep the line moving, and more books kept coming, and he kept signing, and I knew there was something going on there. I could just tell. And then after a couple of moments, I don't know how long it was, I get spotted, and Carter and one of his people, they looked right at me, and it was like their eyeball entered my eyeball. I kind of jerked back a little bit, and I took the rocker arm, the zoom, and I pulled back out. Jeez. Yeah, and I thought, oh my God, I've been spotted. And Tim Coleman whisks my father off, and then I just got the heck out of there because I was like, is Secret Service going to come and grab me? They're going to take the tape out of my camera. Like, what's going on? Were we fully discovered, partially discovered? Anyway, we meet in a Starbucks moments later, and we're out there, I think I played it back because we didn't know what we'd gotten and what we didn't get. I said,
Exactly.
how did it go? Like, let's, I play the tape back, and lo and behold, there it is. You could see it. But my dad gets the question in. Tim Coleman amplifies my father's voice because President Carter couldn't hear him well enough. And yes, he admits to having seen a UFO, and yes, he admits to looking into it during his presidency. And that was I think, I'm not sure, but I think it was a first. Not for him admitting to see a UFO.
Yeah,
but
it was on record, but for him to
admit having looked into it as when he was president. And it basically
way to go, Foxman.
Yeah. So we mau-mau'd the president.
Listen, you send me that clip, and I'll start off next week's show with it.
I will. If
you can.
It
would be great.
I will find it. You send me a text and remind me, and I promise
I will.
Yes, I will.
But once again, Yiddish sometimes is the only language to use. Chutzpah, the gall, the guts, the outrageous courage to, you could be getting out of federal prison right now if all had worked out well. I just love that. And that your dad was a unindicted co-conspirator. I mean, let's
what we're willing to do in our relentless pursuit of truth.
Right. I sacrificed my dad. He's not doing so well anyway. So talk about great pieces of machinery.
Oh, yeah.
Woo!
Lee Spiegel found that plane. It's a 1941 or 42 B-25 bomber. One of the opening scenes of the movie with legendary William Coleman, Colonel Coleman, who had that dramatic encounter in 1955 over Alabama with a couple of engineers.
That is gorgeous, and the painting as well. The Lee Spiegel, of course, the soul brother of both of us, and a dear friend who also worked on the phenomena with you.
Yes, yeah,
and
I got to tell you a quick little story because when Lee found a couple of planes through some of his contacts, I think in Las Vegas, I had called. I said, "Well, Lee, did you talk to the pilots? Do you know what they can and cannot do?" And he goes, "Well, I'm not entirely sure. Here's the number. Give them a call." So I called him up and I said, "Sir, I just, without wasting anybody's time here, if you guys can't fly maximum speed at treetop level, then I need to go." I'm not kidding you because that's what the shot required. And the guy thought for a second. He goes, "Sure, we can do that."
Lee Spiegel, a dear friend, and somebody. One more reason I am proud to be born in Queens, New York. That's awesome. And these two pictures, again, memories are made of this.
Yes, that was in Germany and China. That was in Dalian, China, one of the second largest seaports in China. And that was a general that I celebrated my 50th birthday drinking alcohol that I want to remember the name of it, and it's escaping me right now, but it's clear, and you can light it on fire.
As one does on your 50th birthday. Who doesn't celebrate it with the Chinese general?
There he is. Oh, we had so much fun. The language barrier, but he was such a sweetheart. God, I loved that guy.
Yeah.
We had such a good time. I couldn't go public with him in uniform and anything because for obvious reasons, but he would go everywhere with me, and I would fly my drone in China, and you can't fly a drone without you can't do that.
Wow.
But he would say, "Fly the drone, you're okay."
Wow. This is a perfect example for me of the subject is so important. If it's just a what if, but if disclosure comes, if more and more people take the subject seriously, if we hit a tipping point and people set aside chronic nationalism long enough to think we are not alone. And no matter what I think about these other creatures on Earth that are human beings like me, but you're the other, you're different, I don't like you for this reason, I'm afraid of you. I have a lot more in common with them than them. And we're all in this together. The potential for the UFO subject indirectly to bring us all closer And this picture, for me, is emblematic of it. It's beautiful. It's just great. And
well, that's one thing, one thing that I realized with the traveling that I've done, embraced with open arms in Africa, in South America, in Australia, in China, in Russia, like all across Europe. People are people. We are part of the human race. We might look a little different. We might speak a different language. We might believe in a different God, but we are all human, and we all have way more similarities than we do differences. And I've always said this, and I probably sound like a broken record, that this reality, this story, would really have a very unifying effect on all of us, and that we would finally and ultimately see ourselves for who we really are, and that's one race, one planet.
Yep. For me, this is the central theme that more and more preoccupies me. Of course, I'm curious about where they come from, the nature of their power sources, whether they're born or, created in laboratories. And of course, we're talking about a myriad of thems, but the potential for us here on Earth it's as big as it gets. And talk about poignant images.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was on my dad's back deck. Yeah, that was with my dear friend John Kimmel, who gave me my first video camera.
Oh, that's him.
That's
him. Wow.
Yep, we gave me my first video camera, and we were having a drink, and my buddy John was having a rolled cigarette, and hanging out with my dad. There's my dad in his wheelchair. Yeah, that was just
beautiful.
a couple years before he died.
Boy, talk about the right stuff. Your dad was it and more.
Yeah, there was his little box there. Oh, yeah, there was my dad. He liked to watch, movies, and his eyesight wasn't that great.
Yeah.
So got him a projector with a big pull down screen, and he would sit in his wheelchair and he would extend the legs and kick back and watch a movie.
Yeah. You were such a good son, and you're such a great dad. You just really, we've been friends for a while, but I have to remind myself sometimes there's no affect with you. You've got the bases covered. I remember what you went through after producing The Phenomenon, and everything looked great, and it was going to be in theaters, and then everything came crashing down around you. Very few people know how rough that was. You figure all the romance, I've made the film, I'm going to be famous and meet people, and it's not like that. There are tremendous ups and downs, but boy, your early childhood, which is something in your life really important to me, that people who, again, feel they know you really understand how you got to be the remarkable guy that you are. And before we go on to some more personal stuff, this event that you created with the help of Leslie, and there the two of you are in the middle there, for me, this and the disclosure event at the National Press Club in 2013 or 14 that Steve Bassett created, these are the two most important disclosure-related events so far, not in UFO history, but in history. And bravo to you for making this a reality.
Well, what's really funny is that I remember I had just broken that story with the former governor of Arizona, Fred Remington, and you have the spotlight on you for a little bit, and that it's fleeting, and that you want to kind of strike while the iron's hot, and somewhat similar to what's happening now with the phenomenon. You got the spotlight on you for a little while, and it's great if you can do something good within that short time frame. And I woke up one morning and decided I wanted to put something really powerful together. And I called Leslie. No, I booked it first. I booked it first with a credit card, and I had literally $550 available on my credit card, and probably about $100 in my bank account. And I called the National Press Club, and I booked the ballroom. I picked a date, and I booked the ballroom, and I put the down payment on my credit card I won't
Wow.
bore you with it. And my sister overheard it. My younger sister, Kelly, she's a nurse now. She overheard what's happening, and she goes, I hung the phone up, and she went, did you just book the National Press Club and in November of, and I said, yeah, I just booked the ballroom. She goes, are you out of your mind? Are you going to put this? What are you doing? And I just saw it. I was like, I got to do this, and because the money will always come. Like you got to stay focused on the task at hand. You run out of money a million times. That always happens.
Yeah.
You run out of money. You don't have any money when you start, whatever. You get a dream. You get a focus.
Yeah.
Own in on it, and you don't stop. And people around you will be inspired. And I called Leslie, and I said, Leslie, and she goes, well, we got to talk about it. We got to do this. I said, well, hold on, Leslie. Just so you know, I'm doing this. Okay, this is happening. Are you in or are you out? She goes, oh, the hell with it. I'm in. Yes.
Beautiful. Going from the macrocosm of the life that you are living, the impact you're having on people's thinking, the quality of your film productions as a professional, the people whose lives you're changing in the process. We are going to, in a few short minutes we have left, we have 5 images, and going into the macrocosm, the microcosm. And talking about a microcosm, this creature here, this is his first day. This is him brand new.
Yeah.
I mean, this kid was born with a good mood. He's just, we all love Ollie. I mean, you are sharing him with all of us, but this is as good as it gets. I can't even imagine, because I've never had a kid. I may surprise people someday, but for the moment, this has to be as good as it gets. And moving along.
Yeah. Isn't that great?
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, that's his mama, Rebecca.
Yeah.
And people, people ask me at times, like, why, Rebecca's more of a private person, and I respect that. And she'll post things when she wants to post things, and that's totally fine. But she's a great mother to my son, and she's a wonderful partner, and we just could not be happier with Ollie. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Hardest thing. It's hard. Raising a kid is not easy, but it's the most beautiful, rewarding thing ever.
He also has the anti-gravity device installed on him, like your sister.
Isn't that a great shot? I love that shot.
It's gorgeous.
Oh.
It's beautiful. And here's a surprise for you. I think this is hot off the press. What is this, 24, 48 hours old, this shot?
Oh, yes. That was sitting on the hood. He's looking through the glass window of Lonnie Zamora's truck. And the same glass that Lonnie looked through when he drove it. Yep.
James Fox, it has been a pleasure to have you on. Our time has flown. I can't wait for the next time you and I can actually get together in corporeal 3D form. Watch The Phenomenon. Visit this website, thephenomenonfilm.com.
One last thing, final thing is that we are launching a call to action campaign, UAPactnow.com. UAPactnow.com. We're getting my goal is to get 250,000 signatures.
Wow.
And I think I'll do it, and to push for more government transparency and the report that's due June 25th of this year.
Awesome, James. Again, this is Peter Robbins. My guest tonight has been James Fox. Visit his website, thephenomenon.com, thephenomenonfilm.com. Of course, this has been Meanwhile here on Earth on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Now, next week, change of pace. I'll be joined by 2 guests, Taras W. Matla, and is an artist, curator, and career museum administrator. He is also a ufologist, and come 2023, he will be curating the first major retrospective exhibition of paintings by painter Bud Hopkins at the University of Maryland's Art Gallery. The show is destined to make ufological history, art history, and academic history, because it will also include a parallel exhibition on Hopkins' contributions to UFO abduction research. Working with Taras, my other guest, is photographer and security services professional Chris Bartell. Bartell served in the U.S. Air Force Security Services for 9 years, stationed at good old Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Following his honorable discharge, he was hired by the Nevada National Security Site, and in late 2010 joined the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies as a security officer. He worked for them for 8 years, 6 years of which were spent stationed at the Skinwalker Ranch. And it was there that he created a remarkable photo essay that opens this week. And we're going to be spending time with these two guys talking about the unique crossovers between art, photography, UFOs, and the paranormal, all illustrated, of course. If you've enjoyed this show, please tell your friends. See you next week. Same time, same station. Stay safe, stand up for what you believe in, and be kind to each other.